will be reading from the Storytelling Manual, project number 5, Bringing History to Life. Jon's objectives are to understand the purpose of stories about historical events or people, and to use storytelling skills developed in the preceding projects in this booklet in order to tell a story about a historical event or a historical person. Jon's time today is 7 to 9 minutes.
There's no 7 to 9 minutes. 7:30 to 8:30.
And then what's next?
8 to 10.
Do 8 to 10.
8 to 10.
On Sunday, October 8th, 1871, 2 great fires took their toll on America. We all know about the Great Chicago Fire, but what about the other fire that destroyed about 2,500 square miles and resulted in 1,500 to 2,000 deaths? Today, through the eyes of Father Peter Pernin, we are going to learn about the Great Vestigo Fire. The Great Vestigo Fire, Jon Greene, the Great Vestigo Fire.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am Father Peter, as my friends call me. And when I was about 45 years of age, the diocese sent me to Vestigo, Wisconsin, to be a humble parish priest. Now, I was sort of an itinerant priest, if you will, a traveling priest. Because 10 miles down the road over in that direction, the town of Marionette, that was also a parish to which I ministered. The town of Vestigo, approximately 2,000 citizens. And many of them worked in, as we called it, the wood factory. This was a factory that took advantage of the abundance of wood and trees in the area. A factory that manufactured things like washboards, wooden barrels and buckets, wooden boxes. The town was situated on the Vestigo River, which drained into Lake Michigan. The summer of 1871 was one of the driest summers that anyone could remember. In fact, it was so dry that God tested us with a lot of little forest fires. I remember one of the fires, and I can remember the winds coming off that fire, and the town mobilized, and formed bucket brigades and shovel brigades, and they stopped that fire. They stopped it before it reached the town. On the morning of October 8th, a Sunday, I woke up, went to the church, and gave my services, as I always do. I then had lunch with some parishioners. And as I left their house in the early afternoon, I could feel a hot wind blowing. And I could smell a fire. And as I looked up, way down the road, I could see the orange glow of a great forest fire. Little did I know at that time what God was giving us, how he was testing us with that fire. Now, I said a moment ago that I also served as the parish priest in Marionette. And as I did every Sunday about 3:30 in the afternoon, I walked down to the river, went down to the pier there, and waited for the little ferry boat so I could take the boat the 10 miles and do evening vespers in Marionette. While I'm standing there, someone came and said they just received word on the telegraph that the boat was not coming. The fire further up the river had blocked the river, and the boat was stuck on the other side of the fire. I could not believe this. A fire on both sides of a river that would stop a boat? Well, yes, I found out later that was 100% true. As I started walking back to my home, I had a vision. And the vision told me to dig a trench, which I did. It took me a couple of hours to get down as deep as I wanted to because of all the roots in the soil. And then I took all the possessions in the church that I felt could not be lost in a fire, and I put them in the trench. Took some of my personal possessions, mementos from my family, put them in the trench, and covered up the trench. And as I finished, I was paying attention to my surroundings. And I could hear a wind, like a wind I'd never heard before. And I could feel a heat coming through that wind like I have never felt before. And then I realized it was a fire that later would be known as the Great Fire. While I was standing there, one of my parishioners walked up to me, and I could tell she was frightened. And I ministered to her to calm her down. And she asked what she should do. And I said, if it gets worse, go down to the river. Immerse yourself in the river, and you will be safe. Unfortunately, our town fathers had panicked. And they had stultified. And they were not giving the town the leadership that the town needed. Now, even though it was still light out, because of all of the smoke, it was hazy. And it was sort of like it is at dusk when there's a fog along the Atlantic Sea. By this time, I realized I had better head down to the river. And I started walking down a path that I knew very well. And because I knew that path, I was not looking down, but I was looking up. And I was listening. I could hear birds with a cry from these birds that I'd never heard before. And I heard horses neighing. It was scaring me, even with my faith in God that is supposed to give me peace and calm. I did not feel that peace and calm. And as I walked down this path, my foot hit something, I tripped, and I fell. I slowly stood up, I looked behind me, and there were the bodies of a woman and a child. May God have mercy on their souls. I made my way down to the river, and I entered the river, and I could sense the panic of the people who made it to the river. By now, I reckon it was about 10 o'clock in the evening, and I started talking to these people and calming them down. And I talked to one woman who told me that she and her husband and children were all there. And they had left a gathering, a family. No one else in the family felt it was necessary to go to the river, that God would protect them. Well, the woman and her husband and children were the only members of that family to survive the Great Fire. Ash was falling everywhere. The heat became unbearable even to those of us who were immersed up to our shoulders in the river. God was giving me a test that they never told me about in seminary. By the time I left the river, it was probably 3:30, 4:30 in the morning. I'm not sure. The wind had died down. The fire had subsided. And as I walked through the town, I saw no buildings standing. And I saw chimneys. Can you believe this? Chimneys that had taken so much heat that the mortar that held the bricks together had disintegrated, and the chimneys had fallen and were piles. It was something that as long as I live, I will never forget. No one knows how many people lost their lives in this fire. 2,500 acres destroyed. 2,500 square miles of fire in this whole part of the state. Up to 2,000 people, it's estimated, died. God, you gave me a test. I'm still doing your work. I have not lost faith in you. I passed your test, I believe. Mr. Toastmaster.